All right. I think we can get started.
Let's go.
All right, let's roll in. So just for people who are new, Allison is basically, she's earned her degree in journalism. She's done a bunch of nonprofit management for Pepperdine. And it's also like she's worked as an admissions counselor in Nanjing in, did I'm pronouncing it right? Nanjing in China.
Mhm.
And she's worked across several talented students, gotten them into US universities, and she's also amazing at creative writing, as we found out. She's worked for over 10 years across multiple continents. She has gained insights into what makes an application stand out and how to help students craft authentic and compelling stories. So she's had over 100 students during her career and going to the top 20 schools. She's very sought after, and we are actually lucky to have her as part of Future Forward. So welcome to the Future Forward team, Allison, and thanks for sharing this afternoon with us.
Thank you so much. I'm so excited to be here at Future Forward. I love working with STEM students and showing them that they can be creative writers.
Yeah, absolutely. That's the biggest problem with STEM minds, right? They're so structured in their thinking, and they bring that approach to also essay writing, and the free-flowing nature of essays eventually end up becoming like a very structured essay, and that kind of cramps the style of the storytelling. So absolutely, your guidance will be super valuable. Uh, just out of curiosity, you've done several roles in your career, and just as in intro, what could you tell us what drew you to essay advising, helping students write essays?
Absolutely. I have a background in journalism, and my favorite part of journalism was interviewing people, getting to know their stories, and being able to tell those stories. And that's central to what essay advising is meeting with students and helping them tell their stories and realize that they have really powerful things to say.
Beautiful. Awesome. Yes, they do have very powerful things to say. The end product of those stories look amazing. Every time I look at our students' essays, it's unbelievable. They start out by saying I don't know what to write, and then they end up with this beautiful story that brings out every aspect of their nature, and that's amazing. So which part of the essay writing process or essay drafting process excites you the most?
To be honest, seeing the final product of the essay and seeing how far the student has come is my favorite part, and seeing how excited they are. But I also love when we get a solid outline together and the student sees, okay, I have the bones of an essay. There is something there. That's the part that I really enjoy.
Beautiful. Awesome. One more, just not trying to pull out your resume here, but how many student applicants have you mentored to date? If you have an exact number, I would love to know that. That will be super tickling for us STEM focused folks.
I have worked with over 100 students to date and helping them with advising their essays. And it's been really rewarding. I love working with students. I love working with students who are applying into STEM majors. So about 100.
All right, that's amazing. So I'm going to just pick your memory. Of all the essays that you have helped draft for students, give us an example of one that stands out to you till date, that you always think, wow, that is amazing.
The one essay I think that stands out the most to me stands out because of the student. He was majoring, I believe, in mathematics, and he insisted that he had nothing that he could write about. He only wanted to write about the robotics team, which a lot of STEM students write about, and it can be very redundant for admissions officers. And so then in talking to him, finding out what he did for fun, I found out that he was an avid bike rider. And so I convinced him to write his essay about a bike trip where everything went wrong. There was a thunderstorm, it started raining, his bike broke, he fell, he had to walk his bike a couple miles uphill. But what that essay showed admissions advisors was that he is resilient, that he has tenacity, he's good at problem solving. It really helped him to showcase his voice, and he ended up being accepted into his top choice school, which was Emory.
Wow. Okay. So math kid wanted to write about robotics and ended up writing about a bike ride where everything went wrong and got into his top choice school.
Yes.
Like perfect outcome. Love that. So several of our students are like, right now in the phase of starting their essay writing process. School has ended, AP exams are done. Actually, AP results came out yesterday. I'm sure like a lot of people got fours and fives, so I'm happy for them. A lot of people got threes, not the end of the world. That's absolutely fine too. But moving past that, like now is the time to start working your essays for the next academic application cycle. So before they even get started, right, what would be the one guiding principle you would like to share with all these students who are listening in today?
Be authentic and be vulnerable. Admissions officers aren't looking for you to have accomplished these insane, amazing things. If you have, that's great, and you should write about them. But showcase your voice and be who you are in your essays. That's what's most important.
Okay. So I just want to pair that up with like, jumping now into our Common App essays, like which was the topic of this discussion. So we're going to start like, getting deeper into the main purpose of this call. So basically Common App has not changed any of their essays for this cycle. They have like 7 total, 7 essay prompts, and it basically becomes kind of like, your statement, right? So that's what it's going to become. One of those is what you pick and you write about. So in that sense, like, can you summarize what this year's prompts basically fall under?
Absolutely. So there are 7 Common App essay topics, and I would divide them into 3 separate categories. The first category, I would put prompts 2, 3, 4, and 5 in, and those essays are thinking about a moment. So reflect on a moment or an event in your life. So think small and expand outward. The second category is actually the reverse. They're bigger picture prompts. That would be essays 1 and 6. And so for those essays, you want to encompass bigger ideas, dreams, aspects of your personality, then get small and get specific. Essay 7, which is share an essay on any topic of your choice. I call that the wild card essay because it can be about anything you would like for it to be.
Okay, so as a segue to that, which one is the worst to pick?
7. I
No questions,
really,
huh?
I really, really encourage students to not answer essay prompt 7. To be able to write to a specific prompt is so important. And the Common App gives such a varied amount of essay prompts to write for. So many essays that students will submit under prompt 7 can actually be submitted under prompt 1 through 6. And so sometimes admissions officers can see an essay that was written under prompt 7, and they might judge it as a bit lazy because it doesn't specifically answer one of the other prompts. Or you'll have students who will submit essays that they wrote in their English class for essay 7, which is a huge no-no. Please don't do that. I would advise to avoid essay 7 to submit a topic of your choice.
I'm just going to make confrontational over here. So you were an admissions reader, right?
I was.
Okay, so if you saw somebody write essay number 7, would you consider them lazy?
Yes.
All right, that's fair. That's fair. Okay. All right. So we talked about which is the prompt that is the worst one to pick. So that's great. And so with your decade of experience, right, what prompt, which one tends to inspire the most memorable essays and why? Of course, leaving 7 out from 1 to 6.
Yes. Between 1 and 6, it really depends on the essay more so than the prompt. I will say I think students tend to shy away from prompt number 2, which is writing about a setback or a failure or a challenge because they don't want to seem too vulnerable in their essays. But I think that that prompt inspires some really amazing essays, and it can showcase not only a student's accomplishments, but also traits that you won't find anywhere else in their essay. Resiliency, the ability to overcome challenges. And that's really important. And that's something that admissions counselors are looking for. They don't want you to be perfect. They want to know that you are capable of learning and growing. And prompt 2 can help show that.
Okay, so prompt two is the one where, like, you basically write about a failure, a setback, or something you basically went through. So the bike essay that you talked about earlier by the student, like that would basically belong to prompt number two,
Yes,
right?
that
So
was a
like,
prompt to essay.
that was a prompt to essay. Okay, perfect. Yeah, so I can imagine how that will turn up. It basically shows a side of your personality that doesn't necessarily come up, and that's also due to the fact that students who are specifically in our demographic area over here, like in the Pacific Northwest and like all of West Coast, particularly like U.S. kids of like immigrant parents, they really don't go through so much of hardships and setbacks during their school years. I mean, the maximum setback would probably be like, a C grade in a subject, right? So that being the case, like, it pair that with the other fact that you were mentioning, which is take something really, really small and then like, work outwards from that as to what you learned from it, how you persevered through it, how you built around it, and then like how that changed your personality and your approach to other bigger problems. So that would kind of be like a framework of how you would go approach that essay, right?
Yes.
Okay, cool, awesome. Uh, so then let's get a little bit more specific, right? So most of the students like on the call today are trying to write more. So I want to talk about like what to avoid. So what recurring mistakes do you see even strong students make, and how do you coach them past it?
The one mistake I see students make over and over is they get the idea for their essay in their mind and they jump straight into writing. And then they end up with a draft that's usually a mess. And they're not sure what they wanted to say in the essay. The story might not make sense, or perhaps they recounted the story as it occurred. And so students not outlining is the biggest mistake I see students making. It's really important to outline your essay, to go paragraph by paragraph of what you want to say, and really what is the thematic statement of your essay? What is the thesis that you want the admissions counselors to learn from reading your essay? And skipping over that usually leads to disaster.
Makes sense. Yeah, I mean, usually, like even I think this is coming from the schooling system where when students are asked to write essays, at least I observed like when my kids were going through middle school, the teacher used to basically say, what, first I want you to come up with like your top three ideas, and I want you to get an approval from me for that. And then after that, I want you to write a couple of sentences about each one of those ideas that you have. And then the final stage of that was putting them together into an essay. So they kind of like worked piece by piece by piece to get to the final essay. And then it came to high school, and none of that process was being followed. It was basically just like, blurt out like 300 words of text, and like, you're graded on that, and it moves on from that point. And most of the essays are also like graded on submission, not necessarily their quality. So I think that skill of like, working programmatically, working through your essay is kind of disappeared in high school, and that's coming to haunt them back when they are writing for their colleges. Okay. So how are admissions readers, like being one yourself, how are admissions readers' preferences shifted in the last few years? Like I would say a few years, or like, even a decade. And how should current seniors adjust to this shift in mindset?
The purpose of the essay has definitely shifted. It used to be an accomplishment dump, almost a recount of what can be found in the resume. But students also submit their resumes for the Common App. And so what admissions officers are looking for now is authentic stories that show personal growth and that show traits and accomplishments that won't be found on a resume. That's extremely important.
Yeah, cool. Do you have an example about that?
I do. I'm not sure if anyone has seen JFK's essay to Harvard that circulates online, but the essay, very short, and basically said, I want to go to Harvard. I think Harvard is really great. That was the, the thematic statement of that essay. Harvard already knows that they're great. They don't need students to recount that. They want to know about the student themselves. And so authenticity, personal stories, and personal growth are really, really important. And that's what admissions counselors are looking for.
So if I were to tease that apart a little bit more, what you're saying is don't waste words on telling the college that they are great.
Yes.
The fact that
In-
you're applying to them means that you know they're great, they know they're great. So it's
yes.
you're trying to tell them about you. You're trying to paint your picture, not theirs. Yeah, absolutely. That's like, I mean, it seems so obvious when you say it like that, but then like, when you sit to write about it, people immediately get into this convincing mode of I'm trying to appeal to your vanity to accept me into the college. And when that happens, you end up in a situation where you start like, kind of like glazing them on like, what you want to exactly have them hear rather than what authentically you want to actually share.
Yes.
Right. Cool. So the other thing is like, certain essay topics are kind of like risky, right? So you obviously like the one that you mentioned, which is like the difficulty or setback essay, is kind of like a risky essay because it could end up in a situation where a student could start writing about it, and it could delve into like self pity and like go into that tangent and end up becoming one like with a very negative sentiment around it, right? And obviously like admissions readers are basically reading through hundreds of these. They don't want yet another sob story, like
Mhm.
realistic, right? They want to they want to basically see a positive uplifting kind of narrative. So that being the case, can you share a time when a risky essay subject paid off, and what do you think made it work?
Yes. So one risky essay that comes to mind, I was working with a student. He wanted to major in computer science. He really was not super involved a lot on his campus and was really struggling with things to write about. But he was a boarding school student, and he was from Japan, and he was living in Boston. Boston is not known for their Japanese food, so he took it upon himself to learn how to cook traditional Japanese recipes, and it was a disaster. He was a terrible cook, setting fires. But in that
Holy cow.
essay,
Yeah.
yes, in that essay, what he explored was the importance of his heritage and the importance of community and how he gathered community by cooking these meals. So it was a risky essay topic, I think, to write about cooking, which can be pretty boring. But the way that he branched it into so many other aspects of his life, and then even was able to bring it back to computer science and the importance of being in a community of other people who are interested in studying the same thing that he would like to study, was really important. So a risky essay topic, but I think it paid off.
Wow. Okay. Could I ask where he went to college?
I believe he ended up going to Carnegie Mellon.
Okay. All right. Yeah, that's the best computer science school. So yeah, makes sense. So this actually like ties back to your earlier point where you had mentioned like you want to start with a core and then like talk about an idea and then build around that idea. So his idea of like cooking being the nexus, but then like around that he built in the angle of community, the angle of like collaborativeness, the angle of learning from others, and then I'm guessing like he somehow find out. I still don't know how he connected computer science to it. Like I need to understand that better, but putting that all together, yeah, definitely like I can see the picture showing up, so it's amazing. uh, so here is one thing that like personally advising students like on essays, I have done this quite a few times, and it is the most frustrating thing for the students. It is also the most frustrating things for advisors. So when do you advise students to abandon a draft and start a fresh one without doubling down on like revising an existing draft? Because this happens a lot more than you think it would happen, particularly because students tend to dive directly into essays without a plan and they go too deep into it. So when do you think you would advise them?
I always advise students to abandon a draft when they have not written an outline first for their essay. It
Yeah.
is infinitely harder to try to incorporate the theme into an essay that has already been written, that has already been built. It would be like trying to put the second floor of a house up when you haven't built the first floor. It's so difficult. So if a student comes to me with an essay that's already written, but they don't know what they want to say, they don't know what the thematic statement of that essay is, I will advise them to not abandon the idea, but do abandon that draft and to go back and outline their essay and to start again.
Okay, so by outlining, you're talking about like, so just double click on that a little bit for our audience, right? So
Sure.
what do you mean by outlining the essay? What should be in that outline? Like, what does it mean?
So a good outline should always start with, this is what I want to say. This is my thematic statement. This is what I want the admissions counselors to know about me. And then to think about the story and how to weave that thematic statement into that story. So for some students, if they were writing, say about, to go back to the essay about the student on the terrible bike trip, we start off his essay in the middle of the story, where everything had gone wrong. He's covered in mud. He's underneath trees, to start off with a really impactful opening visual that will hook the audience. Then we go back to, in the second paragraph, how did we get there? So we talk about the student's passion for cycling, and why he wanted to go on this trip. Then in the third paragraph, that's where things start to get wrong. And then we get back to where we started at the beginning. And then we transition into the learning part of that essay, which was the lessons that he learned, not to quit, how he got himself out of that situation. And then final paragraph, we talked about, and in this paragraph, you're going to talk about the lesson that you learned and how you can apply that to other aspects of your life. So that's an example of what an outline would look like, what the story is, what you're trying to say, and how to go paragraph by paragraph in order to tell an interesting, but also impactful story.
The way you described it, it almost sounded like storyboarding to me, right?
Yes.
Like, in the movie industry, like they basically do the storyboarding of like, this is what the scenes fall into. And when you explained it, it was almost like watching a movie. Like, you start in the middle, you're covered in dirt, and like, that's the hook. And then you go back and say how you got here, and then like, what your current state of mind is. And then you go into the growth part of it, saying like how you basically extricated yourself and what you learned through the experience. Like, it felt like I was almost there, even in like, the summarization of it. That's good. Awesome. That example helps a lot, like, put things in perspective. So now we're going into next segment, which is we had asked our audience about specific questions that they want to ask to you, even before, like, when they signed up as part of the sign up process. And so we have a list of those questions. So I'm going to like, hit them off about like what 20 questions. We have a lot of time. So like try to give as many examples as you can for these questions, or like, positive and negative examples. So they get a good flavor of like, what to do and what not to do, right? So the first one is like, what makes a good topic for an essay? So
a good topic is something that is personal to you, something that is unique to you, something that you enjoy, but something that you can also expand upon and shows you in a good light. So a good example of this, I once had a student who wrote about her passion for horseback riding. She loved horseback riding, and so that is what she wrote about. I also had a student whose passion was playing the stock market. His passion was investing. The horseback riding essay came off very genuine, showcased a very unique interest. The stock essay came off as very money hungry and did not show that student in the best light. So we had to shift things around a bit. So a good topic is something personal, something that will showcase you in a good light, and also something that you can enjoy.
that's actually a very nice point. So both of them were passions, and both of them wrote about their passion, but one showed them in good light and one came off as being money hungry. Wow. Okay, so it's not just enough if you write about passion, it's also like the match that happens when the essay does land. Does it show you in a good light? Okay, that's amazing. Okay. how do I pick the right prompt to highlight my story? Like, for Common App, there are obviously 6 prompts. Do I pick a prompt and do I then identify a story, or do I pick a story and then like try to fit it into one of the prompts and like, work that way? So this is always a confusion for students.
There's a few ways to go about picking the right prompt. So with a lot of students, what I'll do is I'll go through all of the prompts with them, skipping number 7. We're not going to submit an essay on the topic of our choice, but I have them cross out which ones that they're going to say absolutely not to. I don't want to answer this essay question. I don't think I have a story for it. And then I'll have them pick about 3 and decide, I think that I could answer this question, and I want them to give me ideas on each of those prompts. And then we talk about what they want to tell about themselves to their universities. And so that's how I help students pick the right prompts to highlight their story. I've also had students who almost do the reverse. They say, this is what I want to tell about myself to university. Which prompt of the ones listed could I best apply my story to? I don't think that there is a right way to go about it, but these are just 2 different strategies that students can use to pick the right prompt to highlight their story.
Got it. Okay. So the next one is kind of like a longer on. No, it's a short question. Okay. What makes an opening line irresistible to readers? I think you hinted on this about like the hook when you were earlier talking about like, showing themselves covered in mud under a tree in the middle of nowhere. So that's kind of like what you said would a hook could look like, but I think they're asking for a more clearer definition, which is more generic. So what makes an opening line irresistible to readers?
At its core, an opening line that's irresistible to readers makes a reader want to read more. So in the bug example that I gave, that's an example of in media res. So you start the story in the middle. So your audience wants to know, well, wait, how did we get to this point? Because it's not
So
like
what is that? You said a specific term for it. What is it called?
in media res. It's a
Okay.
screenwriting term where you start the story in the middle. So your audience wants to know, how did we get there? So that keeps your audience engaged, keeps them wanting to listen, or to, in this case, read on. You can also start with humor. Having read so many college essays, so many of them lack humor that when there was a funny essay that started off with a very funny line, it was always really memorable and made me want to read on and to learn more about this student, because you're hearing their voice and you're hearing the humor in their voice. I think humor is a great way to make an opening line irresistible. A strong opening image is also really, really helpful to set the scene for what's happening. So those are 3 ways to make an opening line irresistible to readers, to sort of craft your hook for the whole essay.
Beautiful. Awesome. So the next question that this reader asked is I think it goes back to that second prompt that we were talking about. Is it safe to write about a failure I'm still working through? So it's not exactly something that's in their past, but yeah, it's basically a question about like, in the process of working through something.
There is no black and white answer to this question. It really depends on the failure. But I think it goes back to something that you said in keeping a positive tone to an essay. So if a student is writing about a failure that they're still going through, one, it shows a lot of maturity to admissions officers that the student is able to recognize that this is a problem they haven't solved yet. And that's really important for colleges when they're picking their students. So I lean more toward, yes, as long as there is a lesson that you can take from that ongoing experience, as long as you're looking, if you are looking at the situation positively, and as long as you are still seeking the answer to that failure, to find the answer to the problem, I think to write about failure you're still going through is fine.
So, like You had mentioned earlier to basically show vulnerability as part of your essays.
Yes.
So this kind of like story shows vulnerability because you're opening up your like, your not so good side to the reader. But the question then becomes like, but still, if you're still working through something, that basically means that you really don't have closure on that story, right? So I'm not sure, like I'm not able to understand if you don't have something that you have conquered or accomplished by the end of it, like your learning process has not completely ended.
Right.
So you're still in the process. So don't the colleges want to see, or the admissions readers want to see, like you went through this like transformation pipe, and then outside a new person emerged, and how does that new person look and what their outlook has changed. So that's kind of what they're looking for, but you really don't have that side to paint about. So is that okay?
I think that is okay as long as some change has occurred. You don't want to write about the brakes gave out on your car and I never learned how to fix them. So the brakes are still out on my car. You can write an essay about how the brakes are on my car. I have looked at YouTube videos. I have talked to a mechanic. I've saved up money. I got an extra job to get my brakes fixed. My brakes still aren't fixed yet. So it's a bit in the framing, because in that very poor example that I just gave, at least you're not in the same position you were in at the beginning where your brakes are broken and you haven't done anything. You've put in work, you're actively trying to solve the problem, and you can see a solution somewhere down the line and you're working toward it. Colleges don't need you to have every single answer figured out. You're in high school. If you had every answer figured out, you wouldn't need to go to college in the first place. They want to know that you're open to learning, and that you're going to put in the work to solve problems and to take in the education that they're offering at their campus.
Perfect. Okay. That I think that was like a very, very helpful answer. Uh, so the next one question is, this is something a lot of people have asked. Like there were multiple questions about the same thing. So that automatically tells me that this is going to be a very common kind of like essay that people are picking. How personal is too personal when discussing family struggles?
This is a really good question, because we just talked about vulnerability and how that is something that admissions officers are looking for. I will say, having read so many admissions essays, sometimes the ones that do stand out the most are the ones where a student is going through something extremely traumatic or really tough family struggles. And so those essays are memorable, but they can be memorable for the wrong reason. I might not remember the student, but I remember what they went through. And you want to make sure that the admissions officers are remembering who you are and what you can bring to the campus, not just what you've been through. In my opinion, it depends on the circumstances of the family struggles. For me, the line is, if you are actively in danger, then the focus isn't on the essay. Your admissions officer is more concerned on, oh my goodness, is this student safe? So you never want the family struggle to overshadow who you are as a student, and what you can bring to a university.
Beautiful. Yeah, that actually resonates a lot. So just last year, I had one student, and she basically is a US citizen, but her parents basically had lost their H1 visa status in the US. So they had relocated to India during her middle school. And she definitely wanted to do her high school in the US because she felt she would have a better chance at accomplishing what she wanted to do in here. So what she did is, in after her 10th grade in India, she relocated back to the US by herself. She did not get into a boarding school, so she lived with her dad's childhood friend's family, and she spent 2 years. And through the process, because she was with a friend's family, like things that kind of like students, us our students take for granted, which is like, they got a parent who will drive them to classes. They got like, they got money that basically they can spend on like extracurriculars. They have access to certain like, certain level of mobility. Like all of those things, which were kind of like very standard offerings, just did not exist for her, because for every single thing, she kind of had to go and bother like, her dad's friend to accomplish that. And in spite of the fact that she was just staying in their house, and her parents could not come to the US because they did not have a visa, right? So, and her little sister was growing up in India, and she was all alone over here. And because of all this, she wanted to do pre-med. She wanted to go into medicine, and she really didn't have any resume even closely related to getting into medicine, right? She had basically her coursework and nothing else. So like when we wrote the narrative for her story, it was more about like exactly this, like, my family struggles and why I made the decision that I wanted to study over here, and how that impacted what I could accomplish in the 2 years that I did have over here. She got into BSMD program at Brown, right? So that's like an amazing story where the university actually sees through that hardship and is able to basically like, pick the student gems because they position their story in the right tone, in the right way. I mean, she could have played the victim and made the story all about like, how she did not have the privilege that was available to others, but she changed that entire narrative into like, a process which said, if I can do so much with so little, imagine what I will do with a Brown BSMD. Right, so that's kind of what the question that came out of the narrative. So yeah, I can totally see like how that would play into like, a very positive message. So the next one is actually a very important question, because we did hint on this earlier. How can I weave extracurriculars into a narrative without sounding like a resume? So it's like almost dumping a resume.
This is something that I see a lot of students lean toward when they are first ideating their essays. They want to talk about what they learned in soccer. They want to talk about what they learned in robotics club. They want to list all of these different extracurriculars and what they've learned from them. But you have an entire section in the Common App for the essay. So you have the entire section in your application for your essay or for your resume of activities. For your essay, don't overload it with extracurriculars. Focus on one and dig really, really deep into it. If you talk about an extracurricular activity, tell a personal story, something that won't be found on your resume. Maybe it's about the time that your robot failed, or maybe it's about the time that you had to do a mathematics project with students that you didn't get along with. Those things will not be found on your resume, but they showcase so much about a student's character. So dig deep into one extracurricular. Don't load up your Common App essay with multiple extracurriculars or multiple accomplishments.
All right. So the next two questions is kind of like very quick, so you can make it like in one word answers. What word count sweet spot should I aim for? Because most Common App essays are 650 words, except whatever you want to write essay is 300 words. But our advice is do not shoot for number 7. So 1 to 6 is all 650 words. So what would be a sweet spot?
Get as close to 650 as you can without your essay becoming full of filler words and adding in things to reach a certain length. 500 at least. 500 when you are looking at an essay as an admissions counselor shows that a student put in a lot of work into their essay when you're just looking at the text on a screen.
The next one is, should I risk humor or should I keep it formal?
Tasteful humor, absolutely. Humor is great. It showcases your voice and it breaks up the monotony of usually very sad essays.
So I just wanted to dig into this a little bit. As an admissions reader, how many essays would you sit and read in one setting?
In one setting, we would probably do over 100 a day.
Oh my God. Okay, so humor is important.
Yes, humor is great. If it's humor that is done well, I've definitely read essays where a student makes a joke and it makes you question their character a little bit about why they might find something funny, that you don't want to happen. But good humor is perfect for admissions essays.
Beautiful. Okay. So the next one is how do I, so I think you talked about this earlier, is like, get very specific, talk about like, specific points, like, pick and like, a specific experience working with students who you did not get along with. So this one is like, it follows along that path. How do I show versus tell my growth?
This is also a really good question, something that students struggle with. And so I like to give them an example. What is the difference between saying, I'm hungry, and going to the kitchen and making yourself a snack? The difference is action. In your essays, you want to see action. It's not enough to say, and then I learned this from this experience. We want to know if you were struggling in math, that you put together a study group, that you stayed afterward and talked to the teacher, that you got a tutor. That's how you studied harder. Don't just say, and I studied harder for math. Show us the steps. Tell us a story about how you studied harder and give us examples. Examples show growth. That's showing versus telling.
That's actually a very good example. I like that. How can I get feedback without losing my voice? This is always the worry for students, right? So they have their authentic, and particularly like, in this age group of students, they want to be as authentic as possible, which is great. But how do they not lose their voice when the feedback does come in?
So for this question, my answer goes back to a writing trick that we have, which is, what is the note beneath the note? In writing, you get feedback all the time, and you don't always agree with it, but it's important to dig deep and to think about, this is the note, this is what they said, but what do they mean by that? So for example, if someone says, this is a confusing part of your essay, the note beneath the note is, I didn't understand. Things need to be clarified a little bit more. And so then you take that note, and using your own voice, you address that note. And so that's how you maintain your authentic voice while also being able to enact feedback into your essays.
Got it. So basically eliminate the first layer of the note and then try to understand why they are saying what they are saying. So basically ask the why of like, oh, why are they saying that it is too impersonal? So then you will get to the real question rather than saying like, it's too impersonal, how do I fix that? Okay,
Yes.
well, absolutely makes sense. What tricks help me avoid cliche endings?
Absolutely. So I think the easiest way to avoid cliche endings is not to restate the essay at the end. So for example, if we're going back to the bike essay, if the student had ended that essay with, and that's how I learned to get back on my bike and ride again, that's a womp womp ending to the essay. All of that build up for, a very cliche ending. So ways to avoid that: don't restate what we've already read. Be specific, be authentic. You can relate the beginning of your essay back to the end. That creates a really good, almost like pattern to remind you of where the student started, and to just be as specific as possible with the end of your essay. Also, never end your essay with the end. You would be surprised how many students end their essay with the words "the end."
Oh my God, really?
Yes.
That's insane. That's like two words wasted right there.
Yep.
All right, cool. So the next one is more about specifically asking, I don't think this is actually a Common App essay, but let's address it anyway. So how do I bring out essays for an undeclared major versus a specific like major, right? So this is always something like a lot of our students, let me give you a little bit of a context on this, right? So when the students reach out to us, they usually come in like, either 11th grade or like, in 10th grade, right? So when they come during these grades, sometimes a lot of students are not sure what they want to do. So the first question that I ask them is like, okay, that's great. What do you not want to do? So that actually helps us narrow down the field. And it's much more like, overarching question, because sometimes students are like, I definitely don't want to touch biology, right? So wet labs is not for me. So they basically have specific things that they don't want to do. And chemistry, I hate chemistry. Organic chemistry is the worst. So when you say things like that, it basically starts narrowing down what you can do, and that helps us build a profile around it for them. But sometimes, in spite of doing all that, when students get to the point where they're applying to college, they're really not sure what major they want to apply to. They've built a well-rounded profile, which is more generic and could fit into different kind of like majors, right? They could apply to poli science, they could apply to law, they could basically apply to public health. Like it's pretty generic as far as profile buildup is concerned, but they've not picked. And that's absolutely fine, because most private colleges are okay with you not picking a major even till the sophomore year, right? So they're absolutely fine with that. So for those kind of students, I think this question is coming from one of those, which is like, how do I bring out for undeclared versus specific majors?
Absolutely. So the most important thing for students who are undeclared is to showcase a thirst for knowledge in your essays. You don't want to write, and I'll figure it out when I get there. That's not what colleges want to hear. They want to know that you have some options in mind, whether you are interested in public health or whether you might be interested in journalism, that you can dig a little deeper into those topics and what you might want to learn about. I think it goes back to what you're saying, is that every student is not a wide open book, even if they are undeclared. There are certain things that are ruled out, and there's other things that are ruled in. So focus on those things that are ruled in, and mention that in your essays if you are an undeclared student. If you are applying and you do have a specific major in mind, showcase what you have done toward that major already. So for example, if you're interested in computer science, have you taken computer science in school? Have you taken courses at your local college? Are you part of a computer science club? So showcase that you are actively looking into that interest. And if you're undeclared, have some things in mind about what you would like to study. I think for undeclared students, their essays tend to be most successful if they've narrowed it down to 2 things that they might be interested in and have done research on those 2 things and showcase that they want to learn about those 2 things.
Beautiful. So there's one more question that just landed on like WhatsApp for me for some reason, not over here. So this question is more about how do I think about, again, this is not, I don't think this is a common app question. This is like, how do I think about the entirety of all my supplemental prompts as opposed to just one individual essay?
Oh, that's a really good question. So it's looking at those supplemental essays, looking at what they're asking for, and really making sure that you are not repeating in those supplemental essays. The supplemental essays are so short, 200, maybe 300 words if you're lucky. So if you're repeating information across those essays, it's wasted space and you don't want to do that. So look at the prompt of the essay and what is it specifically asking for. Is it asking for looking into exploring the major at your university? Is it asking for what you're going to do beyond university, going into your career? Is it asking for what extracurriculars you want to do? So be very careful about answering the actual prompt and not repeating information across supplementary essays. And that's the importance of having someone to look at your essays and go, you repeated this line across 3 different essays.
Cool. I will come back to this because I have actually one slide to share and walk people through it. But I think we do have a question from Cheru. Let me just pull up that question for you. It says, are there any topics that are too quirky to talk about in your essay, or is anything okay? Since I have heard that doing cliche topics is boring and redundant.
So cliche topics are only boring if they are approached in a cliche way. So for example, bike riding can be considered a very cliche topic, but in approached in the right way, it can be a really good essay. I have read essays where a student talked about their digestive issues. I read another essay where a student talked about how they would collect insects and the insects would die. Too quirky. Now the only thing I'm going to remember about your essay is digestive issues and a jar of dead bugs in your room. So it's not always about the topic. It's about how you approach it. So unique topics are great, but just sort of keep in mind how you might be portrayed.
Awesome, cool. So I just wanted to add to that a little bit is one of the things that you need to kind of like think about when you're doing your essays, like as a set, is one, do not repeat stuff, right? So if you think of all of your essays as completely as a painting, then you want the painting to be full. You don't want it to have like, multiples of the same colors, same strokes. And like, think about it like, you're putting a painting together. The more vivid it is, the more different textures there are, the more aspects of that painting show up, the more full it's going to be. And the more the reader can understand who you are. If you basically say that the only activity that you did in high school is robotics, and every one of your supplemental essays is like, oh, I want this in robotics. I basically learned that in robotics. I went through this difficult part in robotics. So we keep indexing that back to that one activity. It becomes very monotonous and it really doesn't paint a well-rounded picture. So when admissions officers talk about like, having a well-rounded profile for a student, it basically comes down to that. They're not looking for you to have solved like, the astronomical, like, your units problem, or they've not looked at you to have solved like, an unsolved Newton-Raphson equation. They're not trying to do all of those things. They're basically trying to say, are you a complete person? Do I get a good sense across all of your essays to say, like, I understand this person and they would be a good fit for this university, right? So that's what they're trying to do. And it's your responsibility to bring out that painting and show it vividly in front of their eyes. And Allison can definitely help, and us at Future Forward can definitely help. So the last question was, how can I reach out to you? So that's great. We have like, our website over there, futureforward.app. You can also email us at info@futureforward. That's our WhatsApp number. You can reach out to that. And we also have a special offer for kids with more than 3.5 GPA. So reach out to us. This is only for rising seniors, by the way. You got to maintain a 3.5 GPA coming into your senior year, right? So that's basically what we have. Anything else to add, Vineet?
There is a question from Vihita. Let's
Okay.
address that. This is about, do you have any advice about writing about a specific object that shows a lot about you, not specific to an extracurricular?
A specific object that shows a lot about you. This actually reminds me, my first year doing college advising, there was an essay that had been published of a student who had gotten into Harvard, and they wrote about Costco and how Costco related to who they were as a person, why they were like a Costco and all the different samples. And it was a really powerful essay. And because that student got into Harvard, the admissions company I was working for at the time said, every student needs to write about Costco. We were in China. there were no Costcos. So it comes off as very inauthentic. So writing about an object as it relates to you as a person, can be an extremely powerful essay. But it's important to make sure that in that description of how that object relates to who you are telling us about who you are showcasing the different parts of your personality that you want admissions officers to know, and that it comes off as authentic to you and not a creative writing exercise that you were asked to do in an English class. So if it's authentic, if it's something that relates into other aspects of your life and shows your personality, then yes, that can be something good to write about.
Nice. There's a let me finish one more thing about this. So objects. Now, also be careful. Look at your entire college list, because some colleges in the supplemental essays may ask you to either write about an object, or like Northwestern has a supplemental essay saying, "Oh, paint the rock." It's a tradition at Northwestern. If you are selected at Northwestern, what would you paint at the rock? So if your personal statement is "I'm a rock," and you're also talking about painting a rock, there becomes a repetition might come across, so you have to be careful. So a context matters a lot, where you are applying, which essays are you writing. So definitely do that inventory before you dive into writing about an object, would be one thing. Next question. Go ahead.
Yeah, so there's one more question. If I have an idea on what to write, what should be my first step in writing that essay to make sure that the theme is shown in the story? First, you have to call us Abhiram, but other than that, I will let Allison answer that question.
Sure. So the first step is to identify what the theme is. That's the first step, is what is the theme? What are you trying to say? And once you know that, then you can structure your essay in showcasing that theme. So if your theme is resilience, what can you showcase in your story that shows that you are resilient? How can you showcase you're creative? How can you showcase that you are a good friend? So the most important thing, the first thing, is what is the theme of your essay? What is your thematic statement?
There's next one, which is, what is considered tasteful humor? Are there some types of humor to avoid entirely, like sarcasm or dark humor?
Yes, I would avoid dark humor. I've seen it done a few times well, but it's really tricky to do. I would avoid dark humor, no political humor, nothing to do with bodily functions. You would be surprised about what students write about in their essays. No curse words. Don't put that in your essay. And I think the best way to make sure something is tasteful humor is to have someone else look at it, not just one person, several people. And if any one person flags it as a bad joke, then take it out. And not bad joke, but not tasteful humor, then take it out.
The biggest problem with the Common App essay is that every college sees it. And every college is going to have a different admissions reader, which means that you're going to have to satisfy almost every single type of personality that is there on the personality chart. And that is very hard to do when you're looking into non-traditional humor. So I would say just stick with traditional humor if you want to add that in there. Nothing self-deprecating, don't do that. It might come off wrong. So avoid even self-deprecating humor. Just focus on the point that you want to convey. And tying that back to the previous point that Allison was trying to make, work backwards from first write what an admissions reader, what you want them to write about you, right? So start by saying that after reading my essay, the admissions writer should basically say, I'll elaborate more on traditional humor. I'll talk about that in a second. But basically, when you write an essay, say, at the end of this essay, I want this person to walk away with this idea about me. This is what I want them to walk away with. Once you start there, the rest of it is basically trying to achieve that goal and put in enough content into your essay to achieve that goal. So work backwards from what your goal is, right? So the next one, Allison, is, can you please elaborate more on traditional humor?
Absolutely. So I think maybe a better way to talk about humor that works great. Puns work fantastic every time. They're, clever, show that you know how to work with words. Also, things that would be considered dad humor also work really, really well. The jokes that your dad might make to you and you go, oh, dad, why would you say that? Those go over great in essays.
Cool. Awesome. We are right at time. So feel free to reach out to us. Our admission cycle has started. Allison's already starting to have meetings with a bunch of our students, and we have space for some more. So feel free to reach out to us if you need help and assistance during this admission cycle, and more than happy to start working. We also take care of summer programs in case you're in rising junior and you basically need to start applying to summer programs. Most competitive summer programs applications are also almost like college apps. Like you need to write a lot of essays. Okay, cool, awesome. We'll hang out for a few more minutes if you have any trailing questions, but thanks a lot. Thanks, Allison, for sharing your wonderful evening with us.
No, thank you for
All right.
having me.
All right, cool.